Okay, so today my title is Talking About Morality. Last month my oratory was Arguments for Morality. And as you may have gathered, I'm building a series of lectures. I hope this is two of what I hope to be a series about the subject of morality. And you all may recall that the reason I was motivated to do this was because my son approached me and said, what are the arguments in your philosophy for morality? I haven't heard them yet, and he's 18 years old, and I feel like I failed him. So I'm going to try to build on that. You may recall that I told the story of the Ring of Gyges last time, and that I suggested that good people have an innate sense of good and evil, and choose the good even in the absence of external sanctions. Private guilt is a terrible emotion to bear. In my short talk today, I want to talk about several virtues, giving stories to illustrate the virtues. And the first one is about justice. I heard a news story this week. A man had purchased an old couch at the Goodwill. And sometime after the purchase, the man's daughter was sitting on the couch and he noticed a hard place in the cushion. The man opened the cushion and discovered $43,000 in cash. So the question is, what should he do? What should he do? And what would you do? And what would I do? Obviously, the Goodwill store did not put $43,000 in their couch, in the used couch. The man did contact the Goodwill store and found out who donated the couch. The man spoke to the donor and learned that the former owner of the couch, this person he was talking to, inherited the couch from her now deceased grandfather. She had decided to give all of the well-used furniture that she inherited to the Goodwill store without any examination. She just said, be gone with it. So the man returned the $43,000 to the donor. It was assumed that the now deceased grandfather had saved $43,000 over his long life, and not liking banks, had just stored it in the couch. By the way, the deadline for our Atlas Shrugged contest is approaching. The deadline is for submissions is April the 1st, 2020. And that made me think of the question, what would Ayn Rand do in the circumstances of the $43,000 in the couch? I must admit that I'm not sure what Ayn Rand would do. You know, she was the author of The Virtue of Selfishness, after all. What would she have done? Now, it's pretty clear that the man who had purchased the couch from the Goodwill store was thoroughly protected by the Ring of Gyges that I talked about last time. Had the purchaser of the couch with the hidden $45,000 chosen to keep the cash, his keeping of the cash would have been completely invisible to the world. With a little care, he would have suffered no negative external consequences, because nobody knew, and the guy that saved the money was dead and hadn't told anyone, and he would have been totally protected by the Ring of Gyges. But let's think about an alternative case. Suppose that the man had discovered a cache of roaches, right, in the couch. Now, he couldn't take the couch back to the Goodwill store and say, look, I found these roaches, and you know the couch is useless to me, because of the famous Latin saying, caveat emptor, buyer beware. So the question I ask myself is, why, if the outcome is good, is your required behavior different from if the outcome is bad, with respect to what you find, surprisingly, in the couch? So here's a list. I'm going to give the entire list, the 13 of Aristotle's from Nicomachean Ethics, his virtues, and I'm going to repeat them more than once, so trying to memorize them at this moment is not necessary. There are 13. Courage, temperance, generosity, magnificence, magnanimity, which is greatness of soul, appetite for honor, gentleness, truthfulness, charm, friendliness, sense of shame, righteous indignation, and justice, which I just gave a story about. Of these virtues, the virtue that stands out as applicable to the case of the $43,000 seems like justice. Justice is the giving of what is due, according to ancient philosophers. Justice is taking for yourself only that which is due, and so that seems sort of applicable here. But what is due in this case is not logically clear to me, although I kind of agree with the guy who found the money's decision. So the next virtue I want to talk about is courage. Now everyone may remember this incident. I think everybody probably was there. Some years ago we were walking on the path beside the Jimmy Carter Center during 4 Walkers, and suddenly we heard a woman screaming behind us. I turned and ran toward the sound. Susan was right behind me. Another walker was being robbed of her cell phone by some miscreant. Fortunately for us, the miscreant ran off before we arrived. And I don't recall whether the woman lost her cell phone or not. She was a little shaken, and she walked with us a little bit, and then the whole incident was over. You remember that, Sally?
No, I wasn't there.
But stories like this are very common, though having sometimes tragic endings for the virtuous actors. Hardly a mass shooting goes by that doesn't include a heroic story about some victim who sacrifices his or her own life to protect another potential victim. This story is common that a soldier, upon seeing a grenade thrown in among his buddies and himself, throws himself on the grenade in order to save his teammates. So think about that virtue. The next virtues I want to talk about are magnificence and generosity. Magnificence and generosity are related. Magnificent pertains to great things, according to Aristotle, and generosity pertains to small things, but both are virtues. So the actions of the fellowship of reason that contribute to the execution of our various events, these are acts of generosity. Susan is generous in her management of the Fellowship of Reason, in her capacity as executive director, operations manager. The president, whoever it might be at the time, is generous with the gift of his or her time in the production, management, and supervision of forum. And Frank is generous in the gift of his time toward the preparation and execution of For Poetry. Judy is generous in the gift of her house and food every week in support of the For Ancient Greek class. Magnificence, though, as opposed to generosity in ancient Greek, pertains to the giving of big gifts. So, for example, if you gave a trireme, which is a battleship, to the city, that would be a magnificent gift. Also, it was famous for wealthy people to donate, to fund plays and festivals for the city of Athens, and this was an example. These were magnificent expenditures. In our own time, or more recently, Andrew Carnegie famously created 1,687 libraries that he gave to the United States of America, including 24 libraries, which he did here in Atlanta, in Georgia. In our own time, Bill Gates engages in magnificent philanthropy. His foundation has $46.8 billion at some point. In 2015, his foundation gave $1.1 billion to infectious disease control, which sounds like this is probably the Vaccinations in Africa program, for example. Now, it's fun to ask in the context of the stories of magnificence, what would Ayn Rand do again, right? Ayn Rand had a specific project in her life, which was to battle against the immorality of what she called the cult of altruism. A knee-jerk guess about Ayn Rand's view of Andrew Carnegie's philanthropy might be that she would object to it, but I'm not by any means sure of that. Personally, I'm not very entirely comfortable with Bill Gates' choices for his philanthropy. I personally would have preferred that he helped closer to home to America, but what do my personal beliefs have to do with Bill Gates' choices for philanthropy? Absolutely nothing. The only effect is upon, as I say, my personal estimation of his virtue. My estimate is not as high as if he were doing this stuff closer to home. I think I also recall correctly that Bill Gates was responsible, or at least in part, for the Common Core, what I think was an education debacle. Another virtue, temperance. My wife Linda, as you know, is a judge, and she recently presided over a DUI, drunken while driving, trial in which witnesses testified about a woman defendant who was falling down drunk. I'll avoid most of the nasty details of her behavior and appearance, but I don't want to exclude this nasty tale, which the woman had to be taken behind a dumpster by a female officer in order to urinate on herself. An opposite story is that of Socrates described in Plato's Symposium. The Symposium describes an all-night drinking party attended by notables such as Aristophanes, Alcibiades, and others. Drinking to the end of the night, the narrator describes, and this is the last paragraph of the dialogue. Here it is. This is a quote. The others began to nod. First, Aristophanes dropped into a slumber, and then, as the day began to dawn, Agathon also. When Socrates had seen them comfortable, he rose and went away, followed in the usual manner by my friend. On arriving at the Lyceum, Socrates washed himself and then spent the rest of the day in his ordinary fashion, and so, when the day was done, he went home for the evening and reposed. The first story of drink is ugly, and the second story of Socrates is beautiful. The next virtue, next to the last, charm. So let's move on to another of Aristotle's virtues, charm. And here is an internet list of some of the features of a charming person. They carry themselves well. They are persuasive. They're smooth talkers. They are good listeners. They are aware of space and time. They adapt to others, and they have great ideas. Maybe you remember, I'm sure you remember the Titanic. I think Jack Dawson, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who is the lover of Rose DeWitt Bucker, or whatever her name was, played by Kate Winslet, he was charming. I don't know if you all remember the play, but I thought he came across as charming. James Bond, in his role as Sean Connery in Dr. No, I thought was charming. So here's some other characteristics of charming people. They like to make other people feel important. They make awesome wedding toasts. This is off the internet. They love rocking what they've got. They make themselves look approachable. They smile regularly. They tell hilarious stories. And they're confident, or at least they seem to be. Taylor Swift and Jennifer Lopez are alleged to be charming. Carmen Diaz, as Mary in the movie, There's Something About Mary, I thought was extremely charming. I don't know if you all saw that movie. The Dalai Lama comes across to me as charming in whatever videos I've seen of him. Now, I'm trying to think in my life, and this is a little depressing, of somebody that I met that was really charming, and I cannot say that I have. I thought Vera Norman might be thought of as charming, but she has some really rough edges.
Yeah, she had some really rough edges, but she didn't hide her rough edges.
Right, and that sort of takes away from the charm, I think.
Oh.
I don't know that it does.
It makes her more human.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
She wasn't like she wasn't a charm machine.
Right. Ayn Rand was not charming. I've been in the same room with Ayn Rand, and Linda actually shook Ayn Rand's hand at a reception in Boston. I was there, but I don't have the same courage that Linda does, so I couldn't approach the great woman. So the final virtue I want to talk about is dignity. Dignity in the face of death is a common fictional scene. And of course, there are many ways you can be dignified other than in death scenes, but that's what I have, the examples I'm going to give. In the movie Titanic, you may remember the scene where the old couple is in their cabin, and they're cuddling one another, waiting to drown in the ship. That's a lovely scene. They're dying with dignity. There's a remarkable scene of the absence of dignity in one of my favorite films, Lars von Trier's Melancholia. You might recall, not everybody saw this movie, Kiefer Sutherland playing the father in that film his family is facing death, and the whole world is facing death because planets are going to collide and annihilate the Earth. But he's found whimpering in a stable of the barn, leaving his wife, young son, and 2 daughters to face death without him. You know, I love this film because of the exploration of the subject of beauty and ugliness, which is done most vividly. And so while I love it, the film, it's a very difficult one to watch. So what's my analysis of this? I have given stories related to these virtues: justice, courage, magnificence, and generosity, temperance, charm, and dignity. My justice story was about $43,000 in cash in the couch. My courage story was about running to help the walker on the path near the Jimmy Carter Center. My magnificent generosity stories pertain to the generosity of all you here in the Fellowship of Reason and the magnificence of Andrew Carnegie. My temperance story related two stories, one ugly story about a DUI person and the other about Socrates and his handling of drink. The charm stories were basically references to fictional characters like James Bond and Something About Mary, just because of a paucity of, truly charming people in my life. No offense. The dignity stories were about elderly couple facing death with dignity and the father in melancholia cringing in fear while waiting for death. So here's my list of the list of virtues one more time. Courage, temperance, generosity, magnificence, magnanimity or greatness of soul, appetite for honor, gentleness, truthfulness, charm, friendliness, sense of shame, righteous indignation, and justice. Are any of these virtues related to, for example, the Ten Commandments? Those are, have no gods before me, you shall make no idols, you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain, keep the Sabbath day holy, honor your father and mother, thou shalt not murder, commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, or covet. Now there is some overlap with Aristotle's virtues of justice and truthfulness here. Otherwise, I don't see much overlap. My point is that Aristotle's list of virtues is much richer and more comprehensive than the God-given Ten Commandments. That which I have hoped to convey by my illustrative stories of virtue is an idea which I think is unique to the Fellowship of Reason and to our philosophy of eudaimonism, and that is that aesthetics and ethics and aesthetics are related. The good and the bad and the beautiful are one. If not one, the good and the bad are closely related. The beautiful is said to consist in harmony, wholeness, and radiance. So, in conclusion, there is much more to be said about the equation of the good and the beautiful, but for today, just consider these observations. There is something both good and beautiful about giving the $43,000 back. There is something both good and beautiful about running to save a robbery victim on the path. There is something both good and beautiful about building libraries and helping the functioning of the Fellowship of Reason. There is something both good and beautiful about Socrates' departure from the all-night drinking party in the Symposium. There is something both good and beautiful about James Bond and Something About Mary. There is something both good and beautiful about facing certain doom with others by comforting one another. We come together in a beautiful and good place among good and beautiful friends. More to come later on this subject of morality next time. Thank you very much.